every Loomian has had at least one noticeable appearance in Loomian Legacy's metagame. Even Loomians like Gastroke, who is known to be one of the worst Loomians in the entire game, saw some use when it was released. However, the Loomian that we're talking about today has had a short appearance in the OU metagame and quickly faded into obscurity. This Loomian is of course Ventacean. Thanks to its subpar attributes and the meta disrespectfully killing off any chances for it to come back, Ventacean has been in the bottom for so long. So let's talk about it. From analyzing Ventacean's horrible attributes, the metagame's ways to deal with Ventacean, and the overall power creep of the role Ventacean plays, this video is all about Ventacean, the definition of a trash Loomian. The base stats of a Loomian for the most part limits what a Loomian can do. This methodology applies to Ventacean heavily. Ventacean's best base stats is its base HP of 90, base energy of 85, and the base melee defense of 142. This allows Ventacean to be one of the most bulky melee defense Loomians in the entire game base stat-wise. However, everything else is very mediocre or bad. The lower base stats Ventacean has is its base speed of 48, which is slower than Sedamar's Yearsnack, Taoshinu, Daiborg, Soldier, and Chartiki. Base melee attack of 52, 28 base stats lower than the non-existent attack of the Rogo. Base range attack of 75, lower than Gobidemic, which does not hit hard at all, and base range defense of 53. When you put all these mediocre base stats together, this makes the weak Ventacean's only niche to be melee bulky. Ventacean's best attributes is arguably its move pool, but that's not saying much because its move pool is super predictable and lackluster. You'd think a wall like Ventacean would get recovery like Rejuvenate, but it doesn't get any, making its longevity very small. Its notable moves are Geyser, Brace, and Battering Ram. Geyser can burn melee walls, which is admittedly very good. However, thanks to its low range attack, Ventacean cannot hit very hard, letting anything that is remotely range bulky switch in. A Battering Ram scaled with 142 melee defense does hit hard, but Bug and Water doesn't have great synergy coverage wise, and Ventacean is not a bug type, meaning Battering Ram isn't stab and doesn't hit harder. Not to mention Battering Ram solo coverage wise gets switched in by almost all metal types, bug types, brawler types, fire types, and air types. The most obvious ways to deal with Ventacean are hazards. Because Ventacean can't heal half of its HP like other Loomians, deteriorating its defenses with hazards can break Ventacean easily. Even if Ventacean switches on a Loomian that it can beat, the hazards and Loomian's chip will be hurting it, giving Ventacean a timer on how many times it can switch in. The more universal way to defeat Ventacean is the metagame's many range attackers that can switch in on its coverage and abuse its paper-thin range defense. Range attackers like Stratosaur, Zeppelin, Wintrix, Cosmere Crack, Valkyrie, and Deladrix can abuse Battering Ram and switch in to get free setup. Wall breakers on the melee side like Halvantic, Metatoad, C.B.O, and Totab have also risen in power with their super effective moves to make Ventacean's lack of good recovery even more evident. Usually, lack of good recovery can be countered with better attributes. For example, Seer Knight and Wobelisk don't have Rejuvenate, but they can set up hazards and provide you utility with their moves. However, Ventacean doesn't have that. It only has damaging moves and subpar setup. If you've been following the meta for a while, then you've noticed the amount of water types that have been used defensively. This normally wouldn't be a problem, but these water types offer more utility or power compared to Ventacean. The most recent addition, Fiskarna, has been used to regift hazards to the other side and to tank hits with its bulky attributes. It's also pretty fast, defensive wise, and strong too, so it has potential to set up and potentially do some damage to the opponents. Other old additions like Luminami and Barblast are still being used too. Barblast doesn't tank as much as Ventacean, but it has more bulk, power, and a preferable defensive typing. Luminami, being the same as it is, can tank hits from both sides of the spectrum, pivot out for pressure, and gain health when switched out. If you want to go even further, common Loomians to tank melee hits like Obsidian, Tundulin, Harvestek, Phagenaut, and Wobelisk have been common throughout the metagame. Obsidian, Tundulin, and Harvestek have their own setup, which is 100 times better than Ventacean. Phase Knot has 2 out of 3 of all pivot moves in the game, so guarantees a pivot from anything if it's not Baneki, and Wobblisk has Barbs, dangerous coverage, and a driving force to force switches. When you consider these Lumians along with utility-filled water types, Ventacean barely has any room to get a place in the metagame. The only thing it can go for is its 142 melee defense, but why need that when you can get more utility from pivoting, reflecting hazard, strong coverage, better setup, and balanced defensive stats. Overall, it seems like Ventacean can never get into the overused metagame. The common theme throughout this video is Ventacean's lack of recovery to hold it back against the metagame's power and the non-existent utility it has compared to other well-known walls. In my opinion, power creep has Ventacean the hardest. Even if it gets Rejuvenate, Ventacean will probably stay where it is. Of course, Rejuvenate is a buff that it needs, but almost every wall it has to compete also has Rejuvenate. It's not getting anything special when everyone else has it. Ventacean is a special case of a Loomian where unless you actively seek out ways to buff it, it's going to stay in the bottom. While it's definitely not the worst Loomian in the game, it's one of the worst. Hopefully you found this video interesting enough to like and subscribe to the channel. This is Cotton Stoops, and remember that Zulong is still a dumpster fire.